All right, so you're here uh, because I'm guessing you like to stay ahead of the curve.
Right.
You want to get to the heart of what's important without drowning in a sea of articles.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we're all about here, cutting through the noise. And today we're going to do a deep dive into something that has, well, the whole web dev world buzzing. Ruby on Rails 8, brand spanking new.
Hot off the presses, right? So we've been digging through a ton of early reports, expert blog posts, some inside scoops from tech companies. Oh, and even those lively debates on Hacker News, of course. Gotta love those.
Oh yeah, Hacker News, can't miss that. Always a good read.
Uh,
But yeah, we wanted to distill all that down to the core insights. Think of it as your express lane to really understanding what this new release means.
exactly. Our mission here, plain and simple, is to extract that pure essential knowledge about Rails 8. We want you to grasp its impact, like the direction the framework is heading in, all while keeping things clear and digestible,
Yeah.
without getting too bogged down in the weeds.
Right. No need for information overload.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, let's unpack this. First things first. Rails 8 officially launched on November 7th, 2024, but they actually laid the groundwork back in September with a beta release.
Oh yeah, at Rails World
Rails World, right?
up in Toronto. That was a big one. Like over 1,000 developers, I think. A 2-day event, something like 27 speakers. It was the place to be.
Wow. Big event. So it sounds like from what I've been reading, their main goal is all about simplifying the developer experience,
Yeah.
like making things easier, more flexible, when it comes to actually building, deploying, and maintaining those Rails apps that we all know and love.
Totally. And the changes they've made really reflect that. You can see the philosophy there.
Okay, so let's start right at the heart of Rails. Looks like they've been doing some serious spring cleaning, some decluttering. I'm seeing a lot of those older deprecated Railties configurations getting the
Okay.
boot, things like config.read encrypted secrets, stuff like that.
Mhm.
So this is all about making the framework what cleaner, more
Yeah,
efficient.
exactly. Cleaner, more efficient, more predictable. And when you get rid of all those outdated configurations,
It makes Rails itself much easier to maintain,
Right.
and and it's also less stuff for developers to keep in mind, which is always a good thing. Less cognitive load.
Yeah, for sure.
Plus, they're phasing out some of the older ways of extending the Rails console, so kind of streamlining that whole process too.
Makes sense.
And then, on the security front, they've added this default regexp.timeout, just 1 second.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, which it might seem like a small thing, but it's actually a really smart way to defend against those denial of service attacks, the ones that can be caused by like those overly complex regular expressions. So it's a good preventative measure.
Yeah, that's smart. Think ahead.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay. And for anyone out there who might still be clinging to those older Ruby versions, well, time to upgrade. Rails 8 officially dropped support for Ruby 3.1. You're going to need Ruby 3.2, 2.0, or newer if you want to play with the new shiny toys.
Yeah, you gotta keep up with the times. And honestly, this makes a lot of sense. It's really about leveraging those performance improvements, and all those modern features that you get in the more recent Ruby versions. So it's a good push forward, I think.
Definitely, definitely. All right, now this is where things get interesting, I think. This is big. For years, right, if you wanted to add user authentication to your Rails app, you basically had to grab a third-party gem like Devise. It was just the way it was.
Right.
But Rails 8 comes along, and boom, built-in native authentication system. No more Devise dependency. This is huge.
It is huge. I mean, talk about simplifying development. I was reading this blog post, and it talked about how the aim is to really streamline user authentication, like get rid of that complexity, those layers of abstraction you often get with those external solutions. And the writer even described it as uh, like Lego.
Like Lego.
Yeah, like Lego, suggesting it's meant to be super approachable, easy to kind of compose and fit different needs.
Oh, I like that. Okay, so approachable and flexible. That makes sense. And speaking of simplifying things, we got to talk about what they're calling the solid trifecta.
Right.
These database-backed adapters for some pretty key functions.
Yeah, the trifecta.
So let's start with Solid Cable.
Mm-hmm.
This guy steps in to replace Redis, which is what we used to use for handling WebSocket communication with Action Cables. So for those who might not be as familiar with WebSockets, it's what lets you have that real-time two-way interaction in your web apps, that live chat feature, things like that.
Exactly. And the really big change here is that instead of relying on on a separate Redis server for that. That whole publish subscribe mechanism, the pub sub that we always talk about, which basically lets different parts of an application talk to each other. Well, Solid Cable stores those updates right in your main database.
Okay, interesting. So right there, that simplifies things, right? No more managing a separate Redis instance.
Exactly. One less thing to worry about. Big operational benefit for a lot of people.
Okay, and then we have Solid Cache. This one is aiming to replace Redis and Memcached for caching. And now, traditionally, that in-memory caching, Redis and Memcache, that's always been like the go-to for speed.
Right, which it's all in RAM, super fast.
Yeah, super fast. But Solid Cache is taking a different approach. It's storing those cache fragments right on disk
Right.
using SSDs or even those NVM drives, which are like blazing fast SSDs.
Mm.
I was reading that DHH, David Heinemeier Hansen, the creator of Rails, he was talking about saying like 10 terabytes of cache with only a tiny, tiny latency difference compared to Screenlight, like 0.5 milliseconds, something crazy like that.
Yeah, it's really a shift in thinking about how we do caching. In-memory caching, it gives you that super low latency, but the trade-off is, well, cost and capacity. So to be able to have these massive caches, right, with barely any performance hit, that's a game changer, especially for apps dealing with tons of data that doesn't change super often.
Yeah, huge implications. Okay, and then rounding out this solid trifecta, we have Solid Queue.
Queue it up.
Queue it up. This one's designed to make job queuing, well, just smoother. And it might even make those separate background job frameworks like Sidekick or Rask a thing of the past.
Yeah.
Because it's integrated directly into Rails, and it even supports recurring jobs, and it has controls for how many jobs run at the same time, concurrency, and all that.
Yeah. Right. So you could potentially like simplify your entire background job setup, which is pretty powerful.
Yeah, definitely.
And again, the theme here is bringing those essential functionalities right into the Rails framework, less reliance on those external systems, and that means simpler deployments, less operational headaches, and maybe even lower costs.
Yeah.
So it's a win-win all around.
I like it. I like it. All right, so let's move on to those tools that developers are using day in and day out. Rails 8, of course, brings some nice enhancements there. There's an improved language server.
Oh, yeah?
For those who maybe aren't as familiar, a language server, it basically gives you that intelligent code completion, error checking, all those helpful features right inside your code editor, like VS Code, for example. And this updated version, well, it gives you better auto completion specifically for active record validations and Rails constructs.
Oh, that's good stuff. Anything that makes development smoother,
Yeah, absolutely.
Less friction. Because, who likes fighting their tools?
No one. Okay, then they've also added this HTTP basic authentication generator, which is basically a built-in way to quickly generate all the code you need for simple HTTP basic authentication. No more writing it all from scratch or relying on extra gems.
Yeah, it's all about those little conveniences, making things easier.
Yeah, and it seems like Rails 8 is full of those little conveniences, which is nice. Okay, so another cool addition is a benchmarking tool, which basically lets you measure and compare how your server code's performing. And this can be super valuable, I think, for making smart decisions about deployment. How to deploy your app, how to allocate your resources. And then there's a small but handy addition. The bin Rails generate script command, well, it now just creates those runnable script files right in your script directory, nice and organized.
Yeah. Again, it might seem small, but it all adds up to a more polished, efficient developer experience, having those helpful utilities right there ready to go.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so of course, any new major version of Rails means improvements to those core components, right?
Yep.
Action Pack, Action View, and Active Record have all gotten some love. And a lot of it seems to be focused on removing even more of those deprecated settings and functionalities.
Spring cleaning, round 2.
Round 2.
Yeah, which is a good thing. It might mean some updates for those existing apps out there, but in the long run, it just means a more secure, more performant, and a more consistent framework overall.
Yeah, makes sense.
So, for example, Action Pack has really cleaned up how it handles request parameters, gotten rid of some of those outdated configurations, and Action View has tightened up how it handles forms, and it's enforcing stricter HTML standards, which is good for everyone.
Right.
And then an Active Record, that's seen a lot of changes. They've removed a ton of those older settings, all with the goal of optimizing performance, especially when you're dealing with large data sets, and just making sure those database interactions are as efficient as possible.
Okay, so can you give me some specific examples of what they've changed in Active Record?
Sure, yeah. So, for instance, they're being much more precise about how they handle float data types in PostgreSQL.
Mhm.
So, distinguishing between float 4 and float 8, which can make a difference.
Okay.
And they've also made it so you can drop multiple database tables with a single command, and they've added more advanced options when you're creating tables in PostgreSQL, like
Hmm.
things like inheritance and partitioning.
Got it.
So those are just a few examples, but you can see the trend there is really towards efficiency and kind of fine-grained control.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
And the enhancements don't stop there. Active Storage, Active Job, and Active Support have all gotten some love too. So Active Storage, which is all about handling those file uploads,
Yeah.
well, it's got improved performance now and support for encrypting uploads, which is huge for security.
Yeah, gotta keep that data safe.
Exactly. And then Active Job for managing background tasks. It has better handling, and it now includes integrated scheduling for recurring jobs. So
Mhm.
if you need something to run
Right.
like every hour, every day,
Yeah.
you can do that right within Active Job now.
Mm-hmm.
And then Active Support, that utility library, well, they've done a general cleanup of older, less commonly used features. So it's just tighter, more focused.
Yeah, and what I really find interesting is how they're constantly refining these fundamental parts of the framework, making sure they stay performance secure and just in line with how web development is evolving. It's impressive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about how our applications actually serve up those web pages. The asset pipeline. Rails 8 is introducing PropShaft as the new default.
Yeah.
It's taking over from good old Sprockets.
Yeah, PropShaft.
PropShaft.
This feels like a big change in how Rails handles all those front end assets.
Yeah, it does.
And I think it's a really smart move. PropShaft is designed for the modern web. It takes into account how prevalent JavaScript build tools are these days and what modern browsers can actually handle. It even offers a #NoBuild approach, which is kind of interesting.
Oh yeah, the hashtag no build.
Yeah, where you just serve those assets directly, no minification, no bundling. It's the approach that HUI.com uses, actually. And the thinking is that it can potentially lead to better caching in the browser, so faster load times for users.
Okay, so streamlined and potentially faster. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. But for those who still need those more complex asset pipelines, if
Mhm.
they're using tools like SBuild or Webpack, well, the JS bundling and Apis and gems are still there, so they haven't completely removed that flexibility.
Oh, good.
Yeah, it's really about providing a sensible modern default, for the majority of applications, but still giving you those escape hatches if you need something more custom.
Yeah, I like that approach. All right, so finally, let's talk about getting those apps out into the world. Deployment. Rails 8 has deepened its integration
Yeah.
with Kamal 2 and its thruster proxy.
Mm-hmm.
And this is all about simplifying deployments, making it easier to get your Rails apps running on
Yeah.
different infrastructure. From cloud VMs to bare metal servers to those virtual private servers, VPSs. It might even mean you don't need those more opinionated platform as a service offerings, the PaaS things like Heroku or AWS Elastic Beanstalk.
Mhm.
And Kamal 2, it can even support running multiple apps on a single server, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, it is. And this focus on simplifying deployment and giving developers more control over their infrastructure, it's a really important trend in this release. It gives developers more options, more flexibility in choosing where they host their apps, and it can potentially save them money too.
Yeah, that's always good. Okay, so with all these new bells and whistles in Rails 8, what are some of the best practices? What are some things we should be keeping in mind as we dive into this new version?
Well, one area that keeps popping up is the use of helpers. The advice seems to be to really focus those helpers on those view-related tasks, formatting data for display, handling presentation logic, and to avoid at all costs putting any business logic or direct database queries inside those helpers.
Right. Yeah, keep those helpers doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Exactly. I mean, it's a fundamental principle of good Rails development, right?
Hmm.
Separation of concerns. But it's especially worth repeating now with a new major version, because keeping that separation clear, it just makes your code so much easier to understand, to test, to maintain.
Yeah. And when you are in your controllers, the recommendation is to use the helpers proxy rather than directly including those helper modules.
Right.
This helps to keep those controller and view layers cleaner, more decoupled.
Yeah, it helps you avoid those weird, unexpected behaviors that can sometimes pop up, and it makes debugging so much easier.
Yeah, for sure.
And this whole helpers proxy approach, it's actually really beneficial in other contexts too, like mailers and API controllers. So it's a good habit to get into.
Definitely, definitely. And then, when you find yourself with that shared logic across different parts of your app, the best practice is still to refactor that into concerns. It keeps things modular, reusable, makes your code easier to test, easier to debug, and easier to extend in the future.
Exactly. And as you're planning your upgrade to Rails 8, it's a perfect opportunity to kind of step back and review how you're using those helpers. Refactor any that have become like bloated, unwieldy, and look at your concerns too. See if they can be improved, or if those new Rails 8 features offer a more elegant way to handle the logic that's in them.
Yeah, good time to tidy up.
Always a good time for spring cleaning.
Always.
Yeah.
All right, so we can't talk about a new Rails version without mentioning that age-old question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is Rails dead? But Rails 8 comes along with all these significant updates, and the energy we saw at Rails World, it really feels like a resounding no to that question.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, as a lot of people point out, big companies like GitHub, Shopify, GitLab, they're not just, still using Rails. They're actively contributing to its development. And that says a lot about its viability, its scalability. I mean, these are massive applications.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of the community, let's tap into some of those reactions, those insights that we saw on Hacker News. There was definitely a lot of excitement about those ongoing improvements to Ruby's performance, especially with YGIT.
YGIT.
Yet another just-in-time compiler.
Just in time.
And there's a sense that Rail 8 is really addressing that missing middle, for applications that need to scale beyond just the very basic level. I was even seeing some reports from early adopters who were getting some pretty impressive latency reductions, like in the range of 15 to 30% in actual real world Rails apps, all thanks to YJIT.
Yeah, those performance gains are definitely a welcome change. That's been one of the criticisms leveled at Ruby and Rails in the past. So it's good to see them tackling that head on.
Yeah, for sure. There was also a ton of discussion around the integration of asynchronous capabilities like Fibers and Falcon. And while Rails 8 has added some pretty significant support for those things, there's still this debate going on about how much typical Rails apps are actually going to benefit. Some people are arguing that because most web apps spend more time waiting for input output, things like database queries or network requests, rather than pure CPU processing, well, these asynchronous features are going to provide some pretty big benefits. But then others are saying, it's those CPU intensive tasks that are often the bottleneck. And without adopting a microservices architecture to spread that load around, the gains might be limited.
Yeah.
Because of contention.
Yeah, it's a really interesting discussion, and it highlights how web application architecture is always evolving. All these different approaches developers are trying out to handle concurrency and boost performance.
Right. And there's even talk about the idea of a modular monolith.
Ah, the modular monolith.
Right, which is basically, you have a large single application, but it's well organized internally.
Yeah.
And that was presented as a potential middle ground, right?
Yeah.
Between the simplicity of a monolith and the complexity of a full-blown microservices setup.
Yeah, finding that sweet spot.
Exactly. And then of course those perennial concerns about the state of the Rails documentation, those popped up again. Although to be fair, people did acknowledge that there are ongoing efforts to improve it.
Yeah, the documentation struggle is real, but
Yeah.
they're working on it.
Yeah, they are. And then as always, the web development world loves to compare. So there were definitely those comparisons to other frameworks, Node.js, Python, Django, Elixir Phoenix, and each one, being acknowledged for its own strengths and weaknesses, things like developer productivity, raw performance, static typing, community support.
Yeah.
It was even interesting to see that some developers who had left Rails, moved on to other things, they're now thinking about coming back.
Yeah, Rails is still a really compelling option for a lot of people, especially with that batteries included philosophy.
Yeah.
Which is really attractive, I think, compared to something like the JavaScript ecosystem, which can be, a lot more fragmented. You often have to piece together all these different libraries, figure out how they work together.
For sure.
And the new solid adapters, those were a big talking point too.
The trifecta.
The trifecta, yeah. Generally, people are seeing them in a positive light. A way to simplify deployments, reduce that reliance on external dependencies like Redis and Memcached. But there's also some healthy skepticism out there.
Right.
People who want to see more real-world testing, more long-term stability before they fully commit, especially if they've already got a lot invested in those established technologies like Sidekeek.
Makes sense. Don't jump ship too quickly.
Right, exactly. And then, it seems like DHH's philosophy, sometimes rejecting those trendy things and really prioritizing developer happiness, developer productivity. That really resonates with a lot of the Rails community.
Yeah, definitely.
And then that built-in authentication, that was pretty much universally praised. I mean, people were happy about that. It's a big deal.
Yeah, for sure. And then finally, the discussion about Sorbet, the static typing system for Ruby that continues. It's considered usable with Rails apps, but
Yeah.
it's still not officially supported, integrated by the core Rails team.
Yeah. So we'll have to see where that goes. But, overall, it's clear that Rails 8 has really stirred things up. It's getting people talking. It's addressing some of those pain points. It's opening up new possibilities, and it's prompting some really important discussions about how we architect our applications. So it's an exciting time.
Yeah, it is. It is. So, all right, let's bring it all home. Why should someone out there listening to this, why should they consider upgrading to Rails 8?
Well, I mean, improved security is always at the top of the list, right? And getting rid of those older, potentially less secure features, that's a definite plus.
Keeping your app on the latest version, that helps to reduce that technical debt that can build up over time.
Right.
And then those performance enhancements, thanks in part to Ruby's YGAT, those are a big draw.
Absolutely. And beyond those core benefits, you've got those simplified development and deployment workflows that Rails 8 brings, all those new built-in features, the potential to reduce your reliance on those external dependencies. That can all lead to a more streamlined and more efficient operation. And let's not forget about that improved developer experience, right? With those new tools, those refinements, it all adds up to an application that's positioned for long-term success, and maintainability as we move into 2025 and beyond.
Definitely. All right, so let's wrap up this deep dive into Rails 8. And it really is delivering some compelling updates, right? Focused on simplifying things.
Yeah.
Development, deployment, reducing the need for all those external services, and then, of course, giving a big boost to both the frameworks and Ruby's performance. It feels like a release that's really about making developers happy and giving them more control over their whole application stack.
Totally agree. It's a more streamlined, more powerful foundation for building those modern web apps that we're all building as we head into the future, 2025 and beyond.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so here's a final thought to leave you with. As Rails 8 keeps adding more and more of those built-in solutions, things like authentication, caching, background job processing, even WebSocket handling, how do you think this is going to influence, developers' decisions about when and why they might reach for those external services? And what could be the long-term impact of this move towards greater self-reliance within the framework itself, How will that impact the architecture, the complexity of web applications?
Yeah, that's a really good question, a really important one to think about as you start exploring the possibilities of Rails 8. And we definitely encourage you to dive into those official release notes, really get your hands dirty and think about how these updates might be relevant to your own projects and to your ongoing journey in the ever-evolving world of web
The
development.
journey, that's for sure.
It is.
All right, well, that's it for this deep dive. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.